She thought she could push me out of her daughter's life in one sip. But she forgot I'd seen everything through the cameras. I thanked her for the drink and let her husband have it instead, when they discovered what was in that glass. Silence filled the room. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother-in-law who installed security cameras in her own home. But when you start noticing things disappearing, conversations suddenly stopping when you enter a room, and your own daughter looking at you with increasingly distant eyes, you do what you must to protect what little family you have left. My name is Eleanor, and for the past 40 years, I've been the backbone of this family. After my husband died when our daughter Melissa was just 7, I worked 2 jobs to provide her with everything she needed. We were inseparable until Robert came along with his charming smile and his mother, Diana. "Mom, could you bring the lemonade pitcher from the kitchen?" Melissa called from the dining room where our weekly Sunday dinner was underway. These dinners had been our tradition for years, even after Melissa married Robert. But lately, they'd become a battlefield of subtle jabs and cold shoulders, mostly from Diana. "Of course, dear," I replied, making my way to the kitchen. As I approached, I heard hushed voices. I slowed my steps, an old habit I'd developed. "Over the past few months, caution in my own home. Just make sure Eleanor gets this specific glass," Diana whispered to my daughter. Through the slight opening of the door, I saw her drop something into a blue tumbler, stirring quickly until it dissolved. My heart froze. 3 weeks ago, I'd installed small security cameras after finding my prescription medications repeatedly short of pills. The camera in the kitchen had a perfect view of what was happening, recording everything to my phone. I pulled it out, watching in real time as Diana finished stirring and set the glass aside with a satisfied smile. "She'll be so sleepy. After dinner she won't want to stay for the announcement," Diana continued. "Then we can finally tell everyone about the move without her dramatics." The move. The words hit me like a physical blow. What move? "I don't feel right about this, Diana," my daughter whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Melissa, we've discussed this. Your mother is too attached. Robert's new job in Seattle is a wonderful opportunity, and she'll try to guilt you into staying. The distance will be healthy for everyone. Seattle, 3,000 miles away, and they weren't planning to tell me until after whatever was in that glass took effect." I composed myself, tucked my phone away, and pushed through the door with a bright smile. "Sorry for the delay. Let me just grab that lemonade." Diana startled slightly, but recovered with a thin smile. "Eleanor, I've already poured you a special glass, the blue one there. I know it's your favorite." I took the glass, noting how eager her eyes were as she watched me. How thoughtful. But actually, Robert mentioned earlier how tired he's been lately. Perhaps he should have this one. I added a little extra. "Sugar for energy." Before Diana could protest, I placed the blue tumbler in front of Robert and picked up a clear glass for myself. A toast," I announced to the table of 8 family members, "to family and the bonds that can never be broken, no matter the distance." Diana's face drained of color as Robert took a long drink. I sipped my safe lemonade, maintaining eye contact with her over the rim of my glass. 20 minutes into dinner, Robert began slurring his words. His fork clattered against his plate as his hand trembled. Then his eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways in his chair. "Robert!" Melissa screamed, rushing to her husband's side. Chaos erupted. Someone called 911. Diana stood frozen, horror etched across her face as she stared at the blue tumbler. "What's happening?" Melissa cried, cradling Robert's head. I remained calm, pulling out my phone. "I think I might know," I said quietly, turning the screen toward my daughter. The kitchen footage played clearly, Diana dropping something into the blue glass, stirring deliberately, her whispered conversation about Seattle with Melissa. The room fell silent as everyone watched. Melissa's eyes widened in disbelief, darting between the phone, her mother-in-law, and her unconscious husband. Diana's voice came out strangled. It was just a sleeping pill. To help Eleanor relax. It wasn't meant for..." "A sleeping pill?" I interrupted. Just one? Then why is Robert barely breathing? The paramedics arrived, rushing too. Robert sighed. What did he take? One asked urgently. All eyes turned to Diana, whose perfectly manicured hands now trembled violently. Check her purse, I said quietly. When they found the prescription bottle of powerful sedatives, prescribed to neither Diana nor anyone in the family, the silence in the room became deafening. As they loaded Robert onto a stretcher, Melissa looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Mom, she whispered. What was she trying to do to you? I watched as police officers entered behind the paramedics, summoned by someone in the confusion. As they approached Diana, whose face had crumpled into silent terror, I realized this Sunday dinner had changed everything. The truth was finally coming to light, but at what cost? As they escorted Diana outside for questioning, Melissa grabbed my hand, squeezing it with a strength I hadn't felt from her in years. In that moment, I knew the battle for my place in my daughter's life was far from over. But for the first time in months, I wasn't fighting alone. The hospital waiting room felt colder than it should have in the middle of May. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching Melissa pace back and forth, her cell phone clutched tightly against her ear. Yes, we're still waiting for news, while she said to whoever was on the other end. No, they're still questioning her at the station. After Robert was rushed to the hospital, Diana had been taken to the police station. The prescription bottle found in her purse contained a dangerous dose of sedatives that could have caused serious harm, or worse, if taken by someone Diana's size. Someone my size. As Melissa continued her hushed phone conversation, my mind drifted back 40 years to when it was just the two of us against the world. I was only 26 when Frank died, a routine physical that revealed stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and 6 weeks later, I was a widow with a 7-year-old daughter, and a mortgage I couldn't afford on my teacher's salary. I still remember Melissa's small hand in mine at the funeral, her voice quiet but steady as she asked, "It's just us now, isn't it, Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart," I had answered, "but we're going to be okay." And we were. I picked up evening shifts at a local diner, grading papers during slow periods and coming home to help Melissa with her homework. We moved to a smaller house, traded vacations for weekends at the community pool, and built a life filled with inside jokes and Sunday pancake traditions. Through her teenage years, we remained close when most mothers and daughters drifted apart. When she got her first heartbreak at 16, we stayed up all night eating ice cream and watching old movies. When she was accepted to college, we both cried, happy tears mixed with the bittersweet knowledge that our little team of two was changing. Mom. Melissa's voice pulled me from my memories. She'd finished her call and now stood in front of me, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Any news?" I asked, reaching for her hand. She shook her head and sat beside me. "The doctor is still with him. They pumped his stomach, but they're monitoring for any lasting effects." She paused, twisting her wedding ring. "The police called. They want me to come down to the station. Diana's asking for me." I kept my face carefully neutral. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," she said quickly, then softened her tone. I need someone to stay here in case there's news about Robert." I nodded, recognizing the excuse but not fighting it. "Of course." After Melissa left, I closed my eyes again, letting the memories continue their parade through my mind. I remembered the day she met Robert 6 years ago. She was 39, established in her career as an architect, and had long stopped bringing potential partners home to meet me. "This one's different, Mom," she'd said over the phone. "I want you to meet him." Robert was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely good for Melissa. He laughed at her jokes, asked thoughtful questions about her work, and even brought me a bouquet of daisies, my favorite, when they came for dinner. "She talks about you all the time," he told me while Melissa was in the kitchen. "The amazing single mom who did it all. I hope you know how much she admires you." I was won over almost immediately. When they announced their engagement 3 months later, I was genuinely happy for them. Then I met Diana at their engagement party. "So you're Eleanor," she'd said, evaluating me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Robert has told me so much about you. It must have been so difficult raising Melissa alone. Thank goodness she found someone stable after all those years of uncertainty. It was the first red flag, a subtle implication that I hadn't provided enough, that Melissa's life had been lacking until Robert came along. But I brushed it aside, determined not to be the stereotypical difficult mother-in-law. As the wedding approached, Diana inserted herself into every decision. Eleanor, dear, don't you think this venue would be better? I know it's a bit more expensive, but I'm happy to contribute. Or, those flowers might trigger Melissa's allergies. Oh, you didn't know about her spring allergies. How surprising. Small comments, tiny rewrites of our history together. But I held my tongue, focusing instead on Melissa's happiness. After the wedding, things escalated gradually. Sunday dinners at my house became Sunday dinners at their house, with Diana often happening to visit. Melissa began forgetting our regular lunch dates or rescheduling at the last minute. Phone conversations that once lasted an hour dwindled to quick 5-minute check-ins. "We're just so busy, Mom," became Melissa's mantra. The first major confrontation came when Melissa and Robert announced they were trying for a baby. Diana immediately began talking about converting their home office into a nursery. "But I thought you were going to use the spare room at my house as a nursery 3 days a week," I said, confused. Melissa and I had discussed this arrangement extensively. She would work from my home part-time after her maternity leave, and I would help with childcare. Melissa looked uncomfortable. "We've been talking, and we think it might be easier if we set up everything at our place. Diana has offered to help with childcare since she's retired." "But that was our plan," I said, hurt blooming in my chest. "We talked about this for months." "Plans change, Eleanor," Diana interjected smoothly. "Melissa needs to do what's best for her family now." Her family, as if I wasn't part of it anymore. After that, the distance grew faster. Melissa stopped sharing personal news with me, and I often learned things secondhand. When she miscarried at 3 months, Diana called to tell me not to visit because Melissa needs space from emotional situations right now. I sent flowers and waited for my daughter to reach out. She never did. The final straw came when I arrived for a Sunday dinner 2 months ago and found my family photographs, ones that had always been displayed proudly on Melissa and Robert's mantle, replaced by new photos where Diana featured prominently. "Where are our pictures?" I asked Melissa when we had a moment alone. "Oh," she looked flustered. "Diana thought we should update things. The old frames didn't match the new decor." "The frames," I repeated. "Melissa, those were pictures of us, your graduation, our trip to the Grand Canyon, your father holding you as a baby. They're just in storage, Mom. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was as if Diana was systematically erasing me from Melissa's life, replacing our memories with new ones that featured her instead. That night, I noticed my heart medication missing 2 pills, though I was certain I'd been taking them correctly. A week later, I found my reading glasses broken in my purse after Diana had borrowed it to get a tissue. Small incidents kept happening, my car keys misplaced when I needed to leave, important phone calls from Melissa that I supposedly missed, though my phone showed no record of them. That's when I installed the cameras. I told Melissa they were for security since I lived alone, but their real purpose was to confirm what I already suspected. Someone was gaslighting me, making me appear forgetful, unreliable, someone who couldn't be trusted with a grandchild. Never did I imagine those cameras would capture what they did today. Diana deliberately drugging a drink intended for me, discussing plans to move my daughter across the country without telling me. "Mrs. Bennett?" I looked up to see a doctor standing in the doorway, chart in hand. "How is he?" I asked, standing. "Mr. Harwood is stable. We've managed to counteract most of the sedatives, but he'll need to stay overnight for observation." It's fortunate he received medical attention so quickly. "Can I see him?" The doctor hesitated. "He's asking for his mother. Is she here?" I felt a chill run through me. "No, I said quietly. She's with the police. The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. I see. In that case, yes, you can see him briefly. He's still quite groggy. As I followed the doctor down the sterile hallway, I wondered what Robert knew about Diana's plans. Was he a willing participant in pushing me out of their lives, or another victim of Diana's manipulations? I was about to find out, and something told me this was just the beginning of unraveling a web of lies that had been spun around my family for years. Robert's hospital room was dimly lit, the beeping of monitors creating a rhythmic backdrop to the tension in the air. I can't believe I let things get this far. Before I could respond, Melissa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression darkening. It's Diana's lawyer. She's being charged with attempted assault and possession of a controlled substance with intent to harm. They want me to come back to the station. Are you going? Melissa hesitated, then nodded. I have to give my statement, but this time, I'm telling the whole truth. After she left, I sat alone in the cafeteria, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. My phone chimed with a text from my sister Karen, who had been at the dinner and witnessed everything. How are you holding up? Do you need company tonight? I texted back that I was fine but would appreciate her stopping by tomorrow. The truth was, I needed some time alone to think. When I finally returned home just after midnight, the house felt different, as if the air itself had shifted. I made a slow circuit through each room, checking the security cameras, half expecting to find them disabled. But they were all intact, silent witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. Opening the security app, I began scrolling through weeks of saved footage I hadn't yet reviewed. If Diana had been willing to drug me in front of everyone, what else might she have done when no one was watching? The first clip showed Diana entering my house using the spare key Melissa had for emergencies. She went straight to my bathroom, medicine cabinet examining bottles before pocketing one. In another clip from 2 weeks ago, she was in my kitchen, opening my daily pill organizer and removing tablets. Clip after clip revealed small invasions, Diana moving my personal items, looking through my financial papers, once even answering my house phone and telling the caller, who I later identified from the timestamp as my friend Susan, that I wasn't available for our planned lunch date. But the most disturbing footage came from 3 days ago. Diana was in my living room, speaking on her phone while pacing. It's all arranged, she said to someone. Once we announce Robert's new position, we'll suggest Eleanor sell her house. I've already spoken to the director at Sunny Pines. They have a room available next month. We'll tell her it's temporary, just until she finds a smaller place. But once she's settled in, Melissa will see how much better everything is. Sunny Pines, the assisted living facility on the edge of town. Diana continued. The doctor already has concerns about her self-care based on what I've told him. One more episode of medication confusion should be enough for a competency evaluation. And my hands trembled as I stopped the video. Diana hadn't just been trying to exclude me from Sunday dinner. She'd been laying groundwork to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized. The next morning, I was awakened by a call from Melissa. Her voice sounded strained, exhausted. Mom, can you come to our house? Robert's been discharged, and we need to talk to you about something important. I arrived to find Robert sitting on the couch, still pale but alert. Melissa paced the living room, stopping when she saw me. The police searched Diana's apartment this morning, she said without preamble. They found your medications, your missing jewelry, and a notebook. She handed me a leather-bound journal. It details everything she's done over the past year. Plans to isolate you, make you appear unstable, eventually have you declared incompetent. I flipped through pages of meticulous notes in Diana's elegant handwriting, dates, times, and descriptions of each manipulation, each planted seed of doubt about my mental state. It was chilling in its methodical detail. Why? Robert asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Why would she do this? I closed the journal. Control. She was losing you to a new life, a new family, This was her way of maintaining her position. I spoke to her this morning, Melissa said quietly. She's being held without bail, she told me. Melissa paused, swallowing hard. She told me she was protecting me from making the same mistakes she did, that you were too involved in my life, that I needed to break free from you like she wished she'd done with her own mother. A chill ran through me. Did she say anything else? Melissa nodded, not meeting my eyes. She said that you had shown your true colors by switching the drinks, that you must have known what was in it, and deliberately gave it to Robert instead. That's ridiculous, Robert interjected. The security footage clearly shows what happened. I know, Melissa said quickly. I don't believe her, but she's twisting everything, trying to create doubt even now. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What happens now? The district attorney is pressing charges, Robert said. They want all of us to testify. Melissa finally looked at me directly. Mom, there's something else. When they searched Diana's apartment, they found files, information about other people she's done this to before, her previous daughter-in-law, Robert's first wife. Robert's head snapped up. What? Apparently, when you and Lisa were married, Diana did something similar. The files suggest Lisa didn't leave you for another man like Diana claimed. She left because she was afraid. Robert's face drained of what little color it had regained. That can't be right. My mother said Lisa was having an affair. She showed me evidence, text messages, photos. Fabricated, Melissa said gently. The police found everything on her computer. She's been doing this for years, Robert. We weren't her first targets. I watched as Robert absorbed this information, years of manipulated truths crumbling around him. My heart ached for him, despite everything. I need to contact Lisa, he said finally. I need to hear the EI's truth from her. Melissa turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I am so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have seen what was happening. I opened my arms, and my daughter fell into them like she used to as a child. Over her shoulder, I met Robert's gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame, anger, and dawning comprehension. The road ahead would be difficult. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend easily. But as I held my daughter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. What I didn't realize then was that Diana's web extended much further than any of us imagined, and that the calm of this moment was merely the eye of a storm that was far from over. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and emotional revelations. Diana remained in custody, denied bail due to what the judge called a calculated pattern of behavior indicating risk to others. The investigation expanded as detectives uncovered more evidence of Diana's manipulations, reaching back decades. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, tending to my garden and meeting friends for coffee, but underneath it all was a constant unease. Diana might be physically removed from our lives, but her influence lingered like a shadow. Robert had managed to contact his ex-wife Lisa, now living in Colorado with her second husband. Their conversation, according to Melissa, had been emotional and clarifying, confirming that Diana had systematically driven them apart through similar tactics of isolation and manufactured evidence. Lisa actually tried to reach out to me when we first got engaged, Melissa told me over lunch at my house, the first time she'd visited voluntarily in months. Diana intercepted her call and told me it was a telemarketer. What would you have done if you'd spoken to her? I asked, stirring my tea. Melissa considered this. I don't know. I probably wouldn't have believed her. Diana was so convincing, so practiced at making others seem unstable or vindictive. She wasn't wrong. Even now, with mountains of evidence against her, Diana had supporters. Robert's older sister Caroline had called twice, leaving voice messages suggesting that Mother would never do such things, and that perhaps I had orchestrated this whole situation to drive a wedge between Diana and her children. I deleted the messages without responding. Some people would never see the truth, no matter how clearly it was presented. We were finishing lunch when my phone rang. Robert's number. "Eleanor." His voice was tight with tension. "Have you checked your email today?" "No, why?" "Diana's lawyer has filed a counter-accusation. She's claiming you doctored the security footage to frame her, that you were the one planning to drug me as part of a scheme to separate me from my mother." My hand tightened around the phone. "That's absurd." "Of course it is. But her lawyer is requesting all your electronic devices be seized for forensic examination. Eleanor, they're coming to your house with a warrant this afternoon." Melissa's eyes widened as she listened to my side of the conversation. When I hung up, I quickly explained the situation. "This is insane," she said, immediately standing. "Let me call our lawyer." While Melissa made calls, I went to my home office and backed up my security footage to multiple locations: my cloud account, a USB drive I handed to Melissa, and one I hid in a hollowed-out book on my shelf. Diana would not erase the evidence of her actions. The police arrived at 3 hours, polite but firm, as they presented a warrant for my computers, phone, and security system. I complied, confident in my innocence and the backups I'd made. "Is this standard procedure?" I asked the officer in charge. "To investigate the victim of a crime based solely on the perpetrator's accusations." The officer, Detective Reynolds according to her badge, gave me a sympathetic look. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm just following orders. For what it's worth, I've reviewed the original footage from Sunday. It seems pretty clear-cut to me." "Then why are you here?" "Because Diana Harwood has connections. Her brother is a state judge, and her cousin sits on the hospital board." She lowered her voice. "The system doesn't always work the way it should." After they left with my devices, Melissa stayed with me, both of us silent for a long while. "I never realized how powerful Diana's family was," she finally said. "Robert told me his family had connections, but I didn't understand what that meant until now." "Money and influence," I said quietly. "A dangerous combination." "Mom," Melissa hesitated, "there's something else you should know. Diana has filed for emergency guardianship of Robert, claiming he's being manipulated and is not capable of making sound decisions while under the influence of medication and coercion." I stared at her. "Can she do that?" "Her lawyer is arguing that the drugs in his system may have caused cognitive impairment, and that you and I are taking advantage of his vulnerable state to turn him against his mother." Melissa looked down at her hands. "The hearing is tomorrow." "This is unbelievable," I said, anger rising. "She tries to drug me, accidentally drugs her own son instead, and now tries to use that to gain control over him." The judge assigned to the case is a former colleague of her brother. Of course he was. The pieces were falling into place, revealing the extent of Diana's preparation. This hadn't been a spontaneous act of desperation. She'd been laying groundwork for months, possibly years. The guardianship hearing the next day was brief but brutal. Diana appeared in a conservative navy dress, her silver hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the concerned mother. Her lawyer painted a picture of a devoted parent worried about outside influences taking advantage of her son's compromised state. Robert, still pale but standing firm, testified to his mother's manipulations, presenting evidence of her interference in his first marriage. I provided copies of my security footage, authenticated by an independent expert hired by our lawyer. But the judge seemed unmoved, focusing instead on Robert's medical condition and the disputed nature of the events at Sunday dinner. Until we can determine definitively what transpired and who was responsible, I believe it prudent to establish temporary oversight of Mr. Harwood's medical and financial affairs, the judge announced. However, given the contentious relationship between mother and son at present, I am appointing a neutral third-party guardian ad litem rather than granting Mrs. Harwood's petition. It wasn't a complete loss, but it wasn't a victory either. Robert would have his decision scrutinized by a court-appointed guardian for at least 30 days, during which time he was ordered to undergo a complete psychological evaluation. Outside the courtroom, Diana caught my eye and smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent chills down my spine. She had lost this battle but was clearly confident about winning the war. 3 days later, I arrived home to find my front door slightly ajar. Inside, my living room had been ransacked, drawers emptied, furniture overturned, pictures smashed. On the wall, written in what looked like red lipstick, were the words, "Lying bitch." The police came, took photographs, dusted for fingerprints, and filed a report. But we all knew who was responsible. Though Diana had a perfect alibi, she'd been meeting with her lawyer at the time of the break-in. "Someone's doing her dirty work," Detective Reynolds told me privately. "We're looking into associates of hers, but without evidence." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Without direct evidence, there was little they could do. That night, as I swept up broken glass and tried to restore order to my home, Melissa helped in silence, occasionally wiping away tears. "You should stay with us tonight," she said as we finished. I shook my head. "I'm not leaving my home. If I run now, she wins." "Mom, it's not safe." "Then I'll make it safe." I pulled out my phone and called a security company, arranging for a system to be installed the following day. "I'm not hiding from her or her threats." Melissa looked at me with new eyes, not as her mother who needed protection, but as a woman of strength standing her ground. Something shifted between us in that moment, a restoration of respect that had been eroded by Diana's machinations. The next blow came in the form of a letter from Sunny Pines Assisted Living Facility, confirming my upcoming residency evaluation and citing concerns raised by family members about my ability to live independently. Attached was a form with Melissa's signature requesting the evaluation. "I never signed this," Melissa said, examining the document. "This isn't even my signature." Forgery. Add that to Diana's growing list of crimes. We took the document to our lawyer, who added it to the mounting evidence against Diana. But each legal step was met with counter-motions and delays, stretching what should have been a straightforward case into a complex legal battle. Meanwhile, Robert's court-appointed guardian restricted his access to family funds and limited his communication with both Melissa and me, citing concerns about undue influence. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court was being conducted by a doctor with ties to Diana's family. "They're stacking the deck," Robert told Melissa during one of their supervised visits. "My mother's using every connection she has to isolate me, just like she did with you and Eleanor." The breaking point came when Melissa was served with papers. Diana was suing for grandparent visitation rights to our future grandchildren, claiming that I had poisoned the family relationship, and that she needed court-protected access to any grandchildren to prevent me from alienating them from their paternal grandmother. "We don't even have children yet," Melissa said, her voice rising in disbelief as she showed me the papers. "This is insane. This is control," I corrected her. "Diana isn't fighting for a relationship. She's fighting for ownership of this family." That evening, I sat alone on my porch swing, watching the sunset and feeling the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me. Diana's campaign against me had escalated from subtle manipulation to overt legal warfare, using every resource at her disposal to maintain her grip on her son and I. By extension, Melissa. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Just heard about Diana's latest move. Need reinforcements?" I smiled slightly. My sister had been my rock through all of this, ready to testify about what she'd witnessed at Sunday dinner and offering support whenever I needed it. "Not yet," I texted back, "but stay tuned." As darkness fell, I made a decision. Playing defense wasn't working. Diana was too well connected, too practiced at manipulation. It was time to change tactics. If Diana wanted a war, she would get one, but not the kind she expected. I wouldn't fight with legal maneuvers or public accusations. I wouldn't engage in the drama she thrived on or give her more ammunition to paint me as unstable or vindictive. Instead, I would fight with truth. Quiet, undeniable truth. The next morning, I began making calls to every member of Robert's extended family, every mutual friend, every associate mentioned in Diana's journal. I didn't make accusations or seek sympathy. I simply asked questions. Did Diana ever suggest Robert's first wife was unfaithful? Did she ever imply I was becoming forgetful or unstable? Has she ever mentioned plans for Robert and Melissa to move away? Person by person, I collected stories of Diana's manipulations, patterns that extended back decades and affected dozens of people. Former in-laws she'd alienated, friendships she'd sabotaged, relationships she'd systematically dismantled whenever they threatened her control. Robert's cousin Emily told me about watching Diana deliberately damage a cherished family heirloom, then blame Robert's teenage girlfriend. His uncle described how Diana had intercepted and destroyed college acceptance letters from schools, too far from home. A former neighbor recounted Diana spreading rumors that Robert's high school best friend was stealing from them, effectively ending the friendship. I always suspected, Emily told me, but she was so convincing, so seemingly concerned. And she'd isolate anyone who questioned her version of events. While I gathered these accounts, Melissa focused on the legal front, working with our lawyer to counter each of Diana's moves. Robert, still restricted by his guardian, began his own quiet rebellion, documenting every interaction with his mother and the guardian, creating a record of attempted manipulation. 3 weeks into this new approach, I received an unexpected call from Detective Reynolds. Mrs. Bennett, we've found something interesting. The security footage from your neighbor's house shows someone entering your home on the day of the break-in. It's grainy, but we've identified him as Marcus Winters, an ex-convict with connections to Diana's nephew. Can you arrest him? We're bringing him in for questioning. But here's the thing. He received a payment of $5,000 the day after the break-in from a shell company we've now linked to Diana. We're building a case for witness tampering and obstruction of justice, on top of the original charges. It was the first real break in our favor, and it came not from confronting Diana directly, but from patiently gathering evidence and letting her overconfidence lead to mistakes. That night, Melissa called with news of her own. The handwriting expert confirmed the signature on the Sunny Pines form is a forgery, she said, excitement in her voice. And the psychological evaluation has been thrown out because the doctor failed to disclose his relationship with Diana's family. Robert's been assigned a new evaluator, completely independent. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The tide was beginning to turn. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the wall of my home office, now covered with notes, connections each and stories from Diana's past. The pattern was undeniable. The evidence overwhelming. Diana had spent decades building her web of control, but it was beginning to unravel, not from a direct confrontation, but from the quiet, persistent exposure of truth. I still had no access to my grandchild-to-be. Robert was still under partial guardianship, and Diana remained free on bail, represented by expensive lawyers. But for the first time since that fateful Sunday dinner, I felt something like hope. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer fighting alone. And as I had learned through this ordeal, there is strength in numbers, especially when those numbers represent people finally willing to speak their truth. My years as a teacher had taught me that sometimes the loudest voice in the room has the least to say. Diana was loud, in her accusations, her legal maneuvers, her displays of wounded motherhood. I decided to be quiet, but purposeful. This is a comprehensive timeline of Diana's manipulations, I said, spreading papers across my dining table where Robert, Pat, Melissa, Karen, and our lawyer, Patricia Mendez, had gathered. Not just what she's done to us, but to others over the past 30 years. Robert leaned forward, his face grim as he studied the detailed chart I'd created. Each incident was meticulously documented, dates, witnesses, supporting evidence, where available. I had no idea it went back this far, he said quietly. My college girlfriend, my friends from law school, even my first boss, she interfered with all of them. Isolation is a classic control tactic, Patricia said. Diana systematically removed anyone who might compete for your loyalty or offer a different perspective. What exactly is our strategy here? Melissa asked, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. We had celebrated quietly when she confirmed her pregnancy last week, joy tempered by the ongoing legal battles. Patricia straightened her glasses. We're building a case not just for the drugging incident, but for a pattern of behavior that the court can't ignore. Diana's connections have been shielding her, but no one is completely untouchable. Meanwhile, I added, we continue gathering statements from everyone in Diana's past who experienced her manipulation. The more voices we have, the harder it is to dismiss us as vindictive or unstable. Robert looked up from the timeline. My cousin Jennifer called yesterday. She's willing to testify about how my mother convinced me that Jennifer had stolen my graduation money. I believed it for years. Cut her out of my life. It was only after I ran into her at a conference last month that I started questioning my mother's version of events. Add her to the list, I said, making a note, and see if she has any documentation from that time. Letters, emails, anything that shows Diana's interference. Our quiet gathering was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I saw a courier with an envelope. Another legal notice, Karen asked, rolling her eyes. Diana's keeping the postal service in business. But it wasn't from Diana's attorneys. It was from Lisa, Robert's first wife. She's sent her entire correspondence with Diana from the last years of our marriage, Robert said, flipping through the envelope's contents. Emails, texts, including ones where Diana posed as me, telling, Lisa, I wanted a divorce. He spread the papers on the table, revealing years of calculated manipulation. Diana had created fake email accounts in Robert's name, sent manufactured evidence of infidelity to both him and Lisa, and even intercepted marriage counseling appointments by calling to cancel them while pretending to be Lisa. This is exactly what we need, Patricia said, carefully organizing the documents. Concrete evidence of a pattern spanning decades. As we worked through the afternoon, sorting evidence and refining our strategy, I noticed Melissa watching me with a new expression, a mixture of admiration and regret. What? I asked. When our eyes met. I'm just thinking about how differently this could have gone, she said softly. If Diana had succeeded that night, if you hadn't seen her on the cameras. I reached for her hand. But she didn't succeed, and now we're going to make sure she can't hurt anyone else. When did you become so strategic? She asked with a small smile. I always thought of you as my sweet, straightforward mom. I was a single mother, navigating the school system for 30 years, I reminded her. I've dealt with my share of manipulative parents and administrators. You learn to play the long game. As we continued our work, Robert's phone rang. He stepped away to answer, returning moments later with a troubled expression. That was my guardian ad litem. Diana's petitioning the court for supervised visitation with me, claiming she's concerned about my mental state and that I'm being poisoned against her. Patricia made a note. We expected this. She's trying to regain access to you, to start rebuilding her influence. Well, it's not happening, Robert said firmly. I've asked for a full psychiatric evaluation, for both of us. If she wants to claim I'm unstable, let's put us both to the test. I nodded in approval. Direct confrontation would have played into Diana's hands, allowing her to portray herself as the victim of an aggressive campaign. But by calmly calling for neutral professional assessment, Robert was standing his ground while avoiding drama. By evening, we had organized all our evidence into clear, compelling groupings: financial manipulation, social isolation tactics, identity fraud, and dangerous escalation. Patricia would present these to the district attorney the following morning, pushing for additional charges beyond the original drugging incident. As everyone prepared to leave, Melissa pulled me aside. Mom, Robert and I have been talking. We want you to move in with us until this is resolved. I don't feel comfortable with you being alone, even with the security system. I started to protest, but the concern in my daughter's eyes stopped me. This wasn't Diana's manipulation making her doubt my capability. It was genuine worry for my safety. Just for a few weeks, I agreed, until things settled down. The next few days established a new rhythm. I moved into Robert and Melissa's guest room, bringing only essentials and my extensive files. Each morning, we compared notes on any new developments, then focused on our respective tasks. Robert working with his new psychiatrist, Melissa managing the legal correspondence, and me continuing to gather statements from Diana's past victims. Word was spreading within Diana's social circle. People she had manipulated or harmed over the years began contacting us, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence as they realized they weren't alone in their experiences. Robert's Aunt Olivia, Diana's sister-in-law, arrived, with a box of letters dating back to the 1990s. She tried to convince everyone that I was stealing from my own mother's estate, Olivia explained as we sat in Robert and Melissa's living room. By the time the truth came out, half the family wouldn't speak to me, some still don't. A former neighbor, Martin Greaves, sent a notarized statement describing how Diana had spread rumors that his teenage son was dealing drugs, resulting in a humiliating police investigation that found nothing. She didn't like that Robert was spending time with our family instead of at home with her, he wrote. Even Diana's former housekeeper provided an account of being fired after she overheard Diana planning to accidentally damage Lisa's wedding dress before the ceremony. The pattern was undeniable, and with each new testimony, Diana's web of influence weakened. People who had once believed her stories now questioned everything she had told them. Family members who had sided with her began reaching out to Robert, tentatively at first, then with genuine remorse for their role in the estrangement. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 month after the Sunday dinner incident, Detective Reynolds called with news. "We've arrested Marcus Winters," she said when I answered. "He's confessed to vandalizing your home on Diana's instructions. More importantly, he's agreed to testify that she specifically directed him to make it look like you were unstable and fabricating threats against yourself." "That's fantastic," I said, relief washing over me. "There's more," she continued. "Based on his testimony and the mounting evidence, we've obtained warrants for Diana's electronic devices and financial records. The DA is considering additional charges of witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and possibly elder abuse, related to her attempts to have you declared incompetent." After sharing the news with Robert and Melissa, I retreated to the guest room to process this development. Opening my laptop, I updated my growing documentation with Detective Reynolds' latest information. As I worked, an email notification appeared in the corner of my screen from Sunny Pines Assisted Living Facility. My stomach tightened as I opened it, expecting another fraudulent admission document. Instead, I found a formal apology from the facility director, stating that they had been misled by falsified documents and assuring me they were cooperating fully with the police investigation. Attached was a copy of the original inquiry, made in my name, with Diana's IP address clearly visible in the email header. The evidence continued to mount, day by day. Diana's lawyer requested a meeting with Patricia, floating the possibility of a plea deal. We unanimously rejected. She tried to drug you, Mom," Melissa said firmly. "She was going to have you declared incompetent and locked away in a facility while she took your daughter and grandchild across the country. We're not settling." Robert's psychiatric evaluation came back with a clear confirmation of his mental competence, alongside documentation of the emotional manipulation he had experienced. The court dissolved the guardianship order, returning full control of his affairs to him. Diana's petition for supervised visitation was denied. Her social standing began to crumble as news of her arrest and the allegations against her spread through her carefully cultivated circles. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her bridge club asked her to take a break from attending. The charity board she chaired called a special meeting and voted to remove her. Through all of this, I maintained my silence in public. No angry social media posts, no confrontations at social gatherings, no dramatic accusations. When asked about the situation, I simply directed people to the court documents, which spoke for themselves. "You're handling this with remarkable restraint," Karen commented one evening as we sat on Robert and Melissa's back porch. "I'd be shouting from the rooftops about what she tried to do to you." "That's exactly what she wants," I replied, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Drama, accusations, public battles. It would let her play the victim, claim I'm persecuting her out of jealousy or instability. Karen nodded thoughtfully. "The quiet truth is more damning than any accusation." "Exactly. Diana expects a frontal attack. She's prepared for it, has defenses ready. What she's not prepared for is to simply be seen, clearly and completely, for who she truly is. The turning point came unexpectedly, at a pre-trial hearing where Diana appeared, confident, dressed immaculately in a conservative suit. Her silver hair perfectly styled, she nodded politely to the judge, completely ignoring our presence on the opposite side of the courtroom. Her attorney presented her as a devoted mother concerned about her son's welfare, a respected community member with no prior criminal record, a woman of impeccable character being vilified by a vindictive former in-law. When it was our turn, Patricia didn't engage in character assassination or emotional appeals. She simply presented the evidence, methodically and without embellishment. The security footage, the prescription bottle found in Diana's purse, the forged documents, the testimony from Marcus Winters, the 30-year pattern of similar behavior documented by dozens of witnesses. Your Honor, Patricia concluded, the evidence speaks for itself. This is not a misunderstanding or a family disagreement. This is a calculated, long-term pattern of manipulation and control that escalated to a potentially lethal attempt to drug the defendant's perceived rival. The judge reviewed the materials silently, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he looked up, his gaze landing directly on Diana. Mrs. Harwood, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed to trial on all charges. Given the nature of the allegations and the apparent attempts to interfere with witnesses, your bail is revoked. You will be remanded to custody until trial. Diana's composed facade cracked, shock and disbelief flashing across her face as two court officers approached to take her into custody. For the first time, she turned to look at us, her eyes filled not with remorse but with cold fury. As they led her away, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for the damage her need for control had caused to so many lives, including her own. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, shouting questions. Patricia gave a brief but factual statement while Robert and Melissa and I stood quietly beside her. When one reporter asked how I felt about Diana, I simply replied, "This has never been about feelings. It's about truth and safety." That evening, as we sat in Robert and Melissa's living room processing the day's events, Robert received a call from his sister Caroline, the one who had steadfastly defended their mother. She's seen the evidence," he said after hanging up. "All of it. She's devastated. Apparently, Diana has been manipulating her for years too, turning her against her husband, controlling her children's lives. Caroline never saw it until now." Melissa squeezed his hand supportively. "Will she testify?" Robert nodded. "She says she has to, for her own healing as much as for justice." One by one, Diana's carefully constructed narratives were collapsing. The image she had maintained for decades, the devoted mother, the pillar of the community, the wronged parent, was dissolving in the face of undeniable evidence. Through it all, I maintained my quiet strategy. No gloating, no public declarations of victory, no dramatic confrontations, just the steady, relentless presentation of truth. As I prepared for bed that night, Melissa knocked softly on the guest room door. "Can I come in?" she asked, entering with 2 cups of herbal tea. We sat together on the edge of the bed, the familiar comfort of shared silence enveloping us like an old blanket. "I've been thinking about what you said to that reporter today," Melissa finally said. "About this not being about feelings but about truth and safety." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "But I do have feelings about it, Mom. I feel ashamed that I let Diana come between us, that I doubted you, that I was so easily manipulated." "Melissa," I said gently, "Diana spent a lifetime perfecting these tactics. You have nothing to be ashamed of. But I should have seen it. You're my mother. I know you." I took her hand. "The most insidious thing about manipulation is how it uses love against you. Diana didn't just lie to you. She created a reality where trusting her seemed like the loving thing to do, where doubting her felt like betrayal. That's not your fault." Tears filled Melissa's eyes. I can't believe I almost let her take us away from you. That I almost let my child grow up without knowing their grandmother. I pulled her close, resting my chin on her head just as I had when she was small. But you didn't. We're here now, together, and Diana can't come between us anymore. As Melissa drifted to sleep that night, I remained awake, thinking about the journey we had taken over the past month. From the moment I saw Diana drop something into that blue tumbler, our lives had changed irrevocably. Relationships had been broken and mended, truths exposed, illusions shattered. The trial still lay ahead, with its public testimony and legal complexities. Diana's web had been damaged but not completely dismantled. Some of her allies remained loyal, convinced of her innocence despite the evidence. The road to full justice would be long, but something fundamental had shifted. The silent strategy, the patient gathering of truth, the refusal to engage in drama, the steady building of alliances, had accomplished what confrontation never could. It had not just exposed Diana's actions, but had begun to heal the damage she had caused. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I thought of the blue tumbler. The drink meant to silence me. Diana had failed to understand that true power doesn't come from controlling others or manipulating narratives. It comes from standing firmly in your truth, even when, especially when, you do so quietly. The silent witness had found her voice, not in shouting accusations, but in methodically exposing decades of deception with calm, undeniable truth. And in doing so, she had not just saved herself, but had begun to free everyone caught in Diana's web of control. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I could see a clear path to victory. Not just legal victory, but the restoration of family bonds Diana had worked so hard to destroy. And that, more than any courtroom judgment, was the true triumph. The morning of the trial arrived with a gentle September rain, droplets sliding down the windows of Robert and Melissa's home, where I had continued to stay. 6 months had passed since that fateful Sunday dinner. 6 months of gathering evidence, giving statements, and preparing for this day. "Are you ready?" Melissa asked, appearing in the doorway of the guest room that had become my temporary sanctuary. At 5 months pregnant, she had a noticeable bump now, her hand resting protectively over it as she watched me put on simple pearl earrings, my mother's, worn for strength. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my navy dress. We had agreed to dress conservatively, projecting stability rather than seeking sympathy. Diana would undoubtedly appear in her most vulnerable-looking outfit, playing the role of the misunderstood mother. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Diana's case had attracted significant attention, not just from the local community but from advocates working against elder abuse and manipulation. Several people nodded to me as we took our seats behind the prosecution table, people whose stories of Diana's manipulation had become part of our case. When Diana entered, escorted by her attorney, a murmur rippled through the room. She looked thinner, her usually perfect appearance slightly diminished by months in custody, yet she still carried herself with dignity, chin raised, eyes forward. Only when she was seated did she allow herself a brief glance in our direction, her gaze skating over Robert and Melissa to land on me with unmistakable hatred. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecutor, a methodical woman, named Sarah Chen, laid out the case without theatrics. "This trial is about a pattern of behavior that culminated in a deliberate attempt to drug Eleanor Bennett," she stated. "But it's also about decades of manipulation, isolation, and control exercised by the defendant, Diana Harwood. The evidence will show not an isolated incident, but the final escalation of a lifetime of similar acts." Diana's attorney countered with emotion, portraying her as a devoted mother being persecuted for trying to protect her son from manipulative influences. He suggested the security footage had been doctored, that the prescription bottle had been planted, that this entire case was an elaborate revenge plot orchestrated by a jealous mother-in-law. I remained composed as he pointed at me, describing me as obsessively attached to my daughter and pathologically jealous of Diana's relationship with her son. Beside me, Melissa reached for my hand, squeezing it in silent support. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over the next 3 days. The security footage played on large screens, showing Diana clearly dropping something into the blue tumbler. Forensic experts testified that the footage was authentic and unaltered. The prescription bottle found in Diana's purse was entered into evidence, along with medical testimony about the potential effects of the medication if I had consumed it. Detective Reynolds described the investigation, including Marcus Winter's confession to vandalizing my home on Diana's orders. The director of Sunny Pines testified about the falsified documents submitted in my name. A handwriting expert confirmed that Diana had forged Melissa's signature on multiple forms. But the most powerful testimony came from the parade of witnesses, describing Diana's previous manipulations. Lisa, Robert's first wife, detailed how Diana had systematically destroyed their marriage with fabricated evidence of infidelity. Robert's cousin Jennifer described being falsely accused of theft and ostracized from the family for years. Former friends, colleagues, and family members each added pieces to the picture of a woman who would go to extraordinary lengths to maintain control over her son's life. Robert's testimony on the 4th day was particularly moving. He spoke directly and honestly about realizing that his entire life had been shaped by his mother's manipulations. "I didn't see it until it was almost too late," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "Every time someone got close to me, a friend, a girlfriend, even my first wife, my mother found ways to create doubt, to make me question their loyalty or honesty. When I married Melissa, I thought things would be different. But then she started working on Melissa instead, isolating her from Eleanor just as she had isolated me from everyone who cared about me. When asked why Diana would drug me, Robert's answer was simple: I was becoming too independent, starting to question her version of events. Eleanor represented a connection to the truth, to a different perspective. My mother couldn't allow that." Caroline, Robert's sister, testified on the 5th day, her hands trembling as she described her own awakening to her mother's manipulation. "She told me Eleanor was trying to turn Robert against me," Caroline said. "That Eleanor had said terrible things about me, that she was trying to prevent me from seeing my future niece or nephew. I believed her because I always believed her. It wasn't until I saw the evidence in this case that I started questioning everything she'd ever told me." Throughout all this testimony, Diana remained outwardly composed, occasionally shaking, her head slightly or leaning to whisper to her attorney. Only when Melissa took the stand did her facade crack slightly, a flash of pain crossing her face as her daughter detailed how Diana had manipulated her. "She would tell me stories about my mother becoming forgetful or confused, then arrange situations to make those stories seem true," Melissa explained. "If my mom showed up late to an event, I later learned it was because Diana had called to change the time, but told my mother she hadn't. If something went missing at my house after my mother visited, Diana would find it in a place my mother had supposedly left it." When asked about the planned move to Seattle, Melissa looked directly at Diana for the first time. "There was no job offer. It was a complete fabrication to separate us from my mother. Diana knew I wouldn't agree to move that far away if I understood what she was doing, so she created this elaborate lie about an amazing opportunity for Robert." On the 6th day, it was my turn to testify. As I took the stand, I felt a strange calm. After months of letting the evidence speak for me, of maintaining my silent strategy, I would finally tell my story directly. I recounted the Sunday dinner, the moment I saw Diana drop something into the blue tumbler, my quick decision to switch the glasses. I described the growing pattern of manipulation I had observed, my reasons for installing security cameras, the evidence I had gathered. Diana's attorney tried to paint me as paranoid, suggesting that I had fabricated threats against myself to gain sympathy. "Mrs. Bennett," he asked with exaggerated concern, "isn't it true that you've had difficulties accepting your daughter's marriage, that you've resented Diana's relationship with Melissa?" "No," I replied simply. "I welcomed Robert into our family. What I resented was Diana's systematic attempts to erase me from my daughter's life. And yet you've created an entire wall of evidence against my client, tracking her movements, collecting statements from people with decades-old grudges. Some might call that obsessive behavior. I met his gaze steadily. I call it protecting my family from someone who tried to drug me, have me declared incompetent, and ship me off to an assisted living facility while stealing my daughter and future grandchild away to another state. By the time the prosecution rested its case, Diana's attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. His cross-examinations had grown less aggressive, his objections more perfunctory. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, the pattern too clear to effectively counter. Diana herself took the stand on the 8th day, her testimony a masterclass in wounded dignity and selective memory. "I would never harm Eleanor," she insisted, her voice catching slightly. "The medication was my own. I sometimes have trouble sleeping, and must have fallen into the drink accidentally. As for the other accusations, I'm heartbroken that family disagreements and misunderstandings have been twisted into something so sinister." She denied forging documents, denied ordering the vandalism of my home, denied fabricating the Seattle job offer. When confronted with the evidence, the security footage, the forensic analysis, the testimony from Marcus Winters, she suggested conspiracy, evidence tampering, witnesses being coerced. "My son has been turned against me," she said, a tear sliding perfectly down her cheek. "Everything I've done has been out of love for him, to protect him from those who would come between us." But when the prosecutor showed her the entries from her own journal, detailing plans to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized, Diana's performance faltered. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her composed demeanor cracking. "That's private property. You had no right." "The journal was seized during a legal search of your apartment, Mrs. Harwood," the prosecutor reminded her. "Would you like to explain these entries to the court?" Diana's explanation, that the journal was therapeutic writing, exploring worst-case scenarios, fell flat against the detailed, dated plans that corresponded exactly with her actions. By the time closing arguments were presented on the 10th day, the outcome seemed inevitable. Diana's attorney made a final attempt to portray her as a concerned mother whose actions had been misinterpreted, but his arguments lacked conviction. The prosecutor's closing was straightforward. "The evidence shows beyond reasonable doubt that Diana Harwood deliberately attempted to drug Eleanor Bennett as part of a long-term campaign to isolate her son and daughter-in-law from Eleanor's influence. This was not a misunderstanding or an accident. It was the culmination of decades of manipulation, control, and deceit." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. As the judge read the verdict, Diana stood perfectly still, her face a mask of disbelief. When he announced her sentence, 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5, plus restraining orders preventing her from contacting any of us upon release, she finally turned to look at Robert. "Everything I did was for you," she said, her voice carrying in the suddenly silent courtroom. "Everything." Robert met her gaze steadily. "No, Mother. Everything you did was for yourself, for your need to control me. And it's over now." As court officers led Diana away, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound relief that the truth had finally prevailed and that my family was safe. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered with cameras and microphones, shouting questions as we emerged. Patricia had prepared a statement, but before she could speak, Robert stepped forward. "Today isn't about winning or losing," he said quietly, his voice somehow carrying over the clamor. "It's about truth and accountability. My mother's actions hurt many people over many years. The verdict doesn't undo that harm, but it acknowledges it and hopefully prevents further damage. That's all we wanted." A reporter called out, "Mrs. Bennett, how does it feel to be vindicated after all these months?" I considered the question carefully before answering. This was never about vindication. It was about protection of myself, of my daughter, of my future grandchild, and ultimately of Robert as well. Diana's manipulation damaged all of us. Now we can focus on healing. As we walked away from the courthouse, Melissa linked her arm through mine. "Let's go home, Mom." "Your place again?" I asked, having grown accustomed to the guest room I'd occupied for months. She shook her head. "No, you're home. We're going to help you move back in and make sure everything is exactly as you want it. It's time for all of us to be where we belong." In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new pattern. I returned to my house, which Robert and Melissa had repainted and refurnished where necessary, erasing all traces of the vandalism. My security system remained, no longer out of fear, but as a practical precaution. Robert dedicated himself to reconnecting with people Diana had driven away, former friends, estranged family members, even his first wife, Lisa, with whom he established a respectful friendship. "I'm trying to rebuild what was broken," he explained. "Not just for me, but for our baby. I want them to know their whole family." Melissa and I resumed our weekly lunches, our easy conversations flowing as if the months of distance had never happened. Sometimes we talked about Diana and the trial, processing the experience together, but more often we focused on the future, particularly the baby due in January. "We want you in the delivery room," Melissa told me one afternoon as we sorted through baby clothes in what would become the nursery. "And we'd like you to spend the first few weeks with us after the baby comes home. If you want to, of course." "Nothing would make me happier," I assured her, folding a tiny yellow onesie. "And we've been thinking," she continued, a slight hesitation in her voice. "If it's a girl, we'd like to name her Eleanor, Ellie for short, if that's okay with you." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak immediately. "I'd be honored," I finally managed. The most unexpected development came 2 months after the trial, when Caroline, Robert's sister who had testified against Diana, asked if she could visit me. We sat in my living room, awkward at first, 2 women connected by painful circumstances, but little else. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Caroline said after initial pleasantries were exchanged, "about how easily I believed everything my mother told me, how quickly I judged you without ever really knowing you." "Diana was very convincing," I said gently. "You shouldn't blame yourself." Caroline shook her head. "But I do, and I want to make it right somehow. I've missed so much of Robert's life because of her manipulations. I don't want to miss knowing my niece or nephew too." She hesitated, then added, "Or knowing you. Your family now, after all." That simple acknowledgement, "your family now," touched me deeply. Diana had spent years trying to exclude me from my daughter's new family, and here was her own daughter reaching out to include me. "I'd like that," I replied sincerely. New beginnings all around. December arrived with gentle snow and holiday preparations. Robert and Melissa hosted Christmas Eve dinner at their home, the table filled with family members from both sides, my sister Karen and her husband, Robert's sister Caroline and her children, even his uncle George, who had been estranged for years due to Diana's interference. As we gathered around the table, Robert raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said simply. "The one we choose to build, not the one defined by manipulation or control." "To family," we echoed, glasses clinking in the warm light. After dinner, as others chatted in the living room, Melissa found me in the kitchen, where I was wrapping leftover pie. "Mom," she said quietly, "I've been wanting to ask you something. After the baby comes, would you consider selling your house and moving closer to us? Not into our home and not into any kind of facility," she added quickly, "but maybe that garden condo development near the park. It's only 10 minutes away." For a moment, I was taken aback. After everything we'd been through regarding my independence, was she now suggesting I give up my home? Reading my expression, Melissa hurried to clarify. "It's completely your choice. I just thought, with the baby coming, you might want to be closer. And those condos have beautiful garden spaces without all the maintenance of your current. Charge to plus and they have excellent security." She smiled slightly at the last point, acknowledging our shared history. I considered her suggestion, recognizing it for what it was, not an attempt to control my living situation as Diana had planned, but a genuine desire to include me in their daily lives while respecting my independence. "I'll think about it, I promised. "It's actually not a bad idea." January brought a snowstorm and, in its midst, the birth of Eleanor Rose Harwood, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, with Robert's dark hair and Melissa's determined chin. I was there as promised, holding Melissa's hand through the delivery, witnessing my granddaughter's first moments in the world. "Would you like to hold her, Grandma?" the nurse asked, presenting me with a tightly wrapped bundle. As I cradled little Ellie, looking down into eyes that seemed impossibly wise for one so new, I felt a sense of completion. The circle that Diana had tried so hard to break remained intact, strengthened now by the trials we had endured together. 2 weeks later, I listed my house for sale and put a deposit on a garden condo 10 minutes from Robert and Melissa's home. The decision, when it came, felt right, a natural step forward, rather than a concession to age or circumstance. On moving day, as Robert and friends carried boxes from the moving truck, Melissa sat beside me on a park bench, across from my new home, Ellie sleeping peacefully in her carrier. "Are you having any regrets?" she asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "Not about moving," I assured her. "I was just thinking about everything that led us here, how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't seen Diana drop. Something in that drink, if I hadn't installed those cameras." Melissa shuddered slightly. "I don't like to think about that alternate reality." "No," I agreed, "but in a strange way, I'm almost grateful for what happened. Not the drugging attempt itself, of course, but for the clarity it brought. The truth might have remained, buried otherwise, continuing to damage us in ways we couldn't see." Melissa nodded, gently rocking Ellie's carrier with her foot. "Truth is powerful that way. It doesn't always come peacefully or painlessly, but it's necessary." As if sensing she was the subject of conversation, Ellie stirred, her tiny face scrunching before relaxing into sleep again. I watched her with a grandmother's adoration, on this new life untouched by the manipulations and deceptions that had clouded our past. "She'll grow up knowing the whole story someday," Melissa said, following my gaze. "Not the ugly details, not when she's young, but the truth of what happened and how we found our way back to each other. I want her to understand the importance of seeing clearly, of questioning when something feels wrong. The lessons of the silent witness," I said softly. "Exactly. That sometimes the most powerful response isn't the loudest or most dramatic. That patient truth can overcome even the most convincing lies." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching as Robert emerged from my new condo, waving to indicate that the last box had been moved in. It was time to begin arranging my new home, creating a space that was entirely mine, yet close enough to be deeply connected to my daughter's family. As we walked toward the building, Melissa carrying Ellie and I bringing up the rear, I thought about the blue tumbler that had started it all, how Diana had intended it to silence me, to remove me from my daughter's life. Instead, it had set in motion events that ultimately strengthened our bonds and revealed truths that needed to be faced. The drink meant to exclude me had instead created a path to deeper inclusion. The attempt to silence me had given voice to dozens of others who had suffered similar manipulation. The plan to isolate had resulted in new connections, new understanding, new family bonds. In her determination to control the narrative, Diana had lost sight of a fundamental truth. Authentic relationships cannot be manipulated indefinitely. Eventually, the silent witness, be it a security camera or a person who sees clearly, will reveal what has been hidden. As I stepped into my new home, where pictures of 3 generations of women already adorned the entryway table, felt a profound peace. The battle for truth had been hard-fought and painful, but the victory was sweeter than I could have imagined. Not because Diana had lost, but because my family had won the right to shape our own story, free from manipulation, and built on honest love. The silent witness had spoken, and in the end, the quiet truth had prevailed.